All right, and we are live, I think. Probably. All right, what's up, everybody? This is Ryan here, and you are watching episode 27 of my live stream Q&A while I fiddle around with the chat box here. So thank you for joining me. It's been a while. I think the last time I actually did one of these Q&As was May. I'll probably just really quickly explain why that was the case. What's up, Nabir? So basically, I ended up moving in with my girlfriend in a different city, in a different province, and here we are in downtown Calgary. I was living on the coast of British Columbia here in Canada, and so everything got disrupted. I had to ship my PC out here, which cost nearly $300, and yeah. First, I moved to Edmonton, which, if you're from Canada, then you'll know that Edmonton is the brunt of many, many jokes. It's a pretty terrible city. I mean that with love, but it's just an awful city. And then I moved south a month after that to Calgary, which is a nicer city. It's still Alberta, and I'm from BC, so I'd still rather live on the coast. But Calgary is a pretty nice city. So I have an apartment, a kind of recording studio in it, and life is good. I have very little to complain about. So that's pretty much all my crap. What's up, Trax and Nikhil? Hey, is that how I pronounce your name, Trax? Anyways, so yeah, that's pretty much all I have to share. For learning goals and stuff like that, I've mainly been learning Russian. And basically, well, here's the thing, Patrick. I could sing Comfortably Numb. I just do a really, really bad job of it. So I don't think anyone really wants to do me. Wow, that was quite the turn of phrase. I don't think anyone really wants to hear me sing Comfortably Numb, but I could sing it. By the way, everyone, that was a reference to the Pink Floyd shirt I'm wearing. Okay. So anyways, yeah, I've been studying compiler development. So if you don't know what compiler development is, basically a compiler in a nutshell is a program that takes in source code and then produces some kind of executable files. There's a lot more to it than that, and there's kind of different types of compilers. But basically, I have been learning about language development. I've been building my own language. It's called Donk, short for donkey, big surprise. And that's been a really fun and also very challenging experience because writing the scanner, well, I won't get too technical here, but writing the first step in a compiler, which is like a tokenizer, was kind of challenging, but pretty easy once I got the general idea. The next step was writing this thing called a recursive descent parser, and that's been more challenging, but it's nearly done. Anyways, apparently people have questions, so I'm going to say, yeah, just start firing away the questions. Please don't spam. If I do miss your question, obviously let me know, but don't spam questions, because the more you spam a question, the less likely I am to answer it. But yeah, just give her, and basically how this show works is you ask questions and I try and answer them using a combination of Notepad. Let me get into code mode here. I still only have one monitor, so you guys get to see all the crap here. So yeah, I basically try and answer questions. I try to use visual aids like Notepad or WordPad, and I also have Android Studio open here so I can type out Kotlin stuff potentially. And welcome Fortune, Aloha, and Patrick and Suhas. So I've set up the, oh, that's an, oh, interesting starting question. Okay. What is object-oriented programming? That's a good question. So I'm going to be better at answering this question in a more practical way. I'll start with some theory and then get into the practice. There is a very specific technical thing that gave rise to object-oriented programming, and I'm trying to remember, it had something to do with like pointers or something like that. And I'm not going to go into that because that information is it's not really super useful to someone who's trying to write practical code. But I would encourage you, there is actually a specific thing that gave rise to, what was it? I think it was like having pointers to the heap or something like that. So anyways, let's dive in here. Also really quickly, Patrick, I can elaborate on this later, but Mbvm is not always tied to live data. In fact, I don't do live data whenever I do Mbvm. So let's start with the question. I think that's your name. Oh my God, my copy-paste skills have atrophied. Nabir asks, what is object-oriented programming? So like I said before, there's a very specific technical thing that gave rise to object-oriented programming. I'm going to try and give sort of an argument in favor of object-oriented programming, but then I'm also going to sort of point out its flaws. And then I'll try to give it in sort of like a Java Kotlin specific in practice type thing. And hopefully that'll be enough for you. And I'll try and do this relatively quickly. So, and this might be a little bit of a weird explanation, but you've got to understand, I don't really explain stuff like most people do. Because I have to connect the things I know with things that I'm familiar with, and I have to understand them in my own way. And my way of understanding these things isn't always regurgitating a bunch of technical information. So what I'd actually like you to start with, Nabir, is think about what humans do. We look at things like this cup of water, and our mind recognizes this as an object. In fact, my mind associated cup of water with this thing. And what do we really have when we look at this? We have like some plastic molecules shaped into a particular form. We've got some color to it. There's the H2O inside, the water inside. So in a non-technical way of explaining it, which I think is an important place to start, object-oriented programming is a way in which we can model real-world objects and processes, objects and verbs, let's say, as what I'll call programming objects, which typically means classes. It doesn't always mean that, but that's generally what it means. So in the most general sense, object-oriented programming is so imagine you're a programmer and you've been given a job. Your job is to build a dating application, for example. So when you're working in an object-oriented programming language, you're going to ask yourself the question, what parts of reality, the outside world, do I need to model as objects? And then that's one of the first things you will do. So for example, a dating app, you would have like probably a user object, and the user object is going to have whatever. I'll just make some stuff up here, and this is pseudocode. But imagine this is like a class. Class user, phone number, location, what's another thing? Whatever, it's a dating app, so gender, whatever. So basically in object-oriented programming, in a non-technical way of explaining it, it's modeling some part of the outside world or reality largely as these class objects, and then from there you use functions to manipulate these class objects. That's a very broad definition because it's hard to explain something as broad as object-oriented programming really quickly, but this is like a general way to think about object-oriented programming. Now, this is the non-technical explanation of what object-oriented programming is, modeling reality as objects. Think of this as an object. Now, there's other things that we need to sort of clear up here. So when I think of object-oriented programming, by way of having these things called classes and type hierarchies, it starts to give rise to different kinds of coding constructs. So we can have inheritance, hopefully I spelled that right. We can have abstractions. We can have what are known as, these are actually, let's do it like this, because interfaces are abstractions. Abstract classes. These are also called protocols in some languages. So basically, by way of this method of modeling things as classes and using type hierarchies, it gives rise to different ways of modeling an entire application. Now, I can't, if you want me to go into detail on any one of these topics, I can later after I answer some other questions. There's too much for me to get into here. But basically, these are the sorts of things that you'll want to learn about in an object-oriented program, and they're programming language. And they're really important things. You need to know these things if you're working in an object-oriented programming language. So I don't want to ramble for too long on this topic because it's just too broad, but I want to just leave you with a thought thinking about functional programming. So in a functional program, in the general sense, as opposed to having like class user, you're going to have something like function user, and the arguments to that function might be the data points that you want to return, and so forth. So it's important not to think of object-oriented programming and functional programming as being super different. They have some strong differences, but what it really comes down to is that ultimately we're all, whether it's you're writing in Haskell, which is a functional programming language, or you're writing in Java, it all goes down to assembly, which is sort of an, I don't want to get into talking about imperative programming, but it all comes down to the same thing. The machines more or less work the same way, they just have different sizes and speeds to them. So these things aren't, it's useful to learn about functional programming and object-oriented programming, and I think it's really good to use a language like Kotlin, which gives you features of both. But don't look at these things as being like incredibly different, and instead try to imagine your object-oriented programs. Try writing some of your object-oriented programs using more functions, more functional style, and you'll have some interesting things happen. I think there was a follow-up here, just from TubeFast. Let me just fire off Nibir's question, TubeFast questions here. So just follow up. Can you tell me about C, C++, and C#, their merit and demerits? So really quickly, the merit of C language is that it's quite close to assembly language. So the advantage of C, just really quickly, so pro would be very efficient, and it can be deployed, it can be deployed on almost any kind of computer. For con, simply not as efficient to write things like enterprise systems. So we talked about our dating app, enterprise systems from the developer perspective. Because what you won't get with C is you won't get things like classes. You can, basically any program you can write in C++ or C#, you could hypothetically write it in C. There's just reasons why you wouldn't do that in like a big enterprise style application. If you're writing something that's very close to the metal, so to speak, and needs to be very efficient, like for example, something really efficient that talks to the Linux kernel on Android or something, C or C++ would be a good choice. C++ in a nutshell is C with classes. generally speaking, again, unless your primary concern is writing something that's super efficient, you'd probably want to write C. I think C++ is a good balance of being still quite close to the, still quite efficient and close to the metal, so to speak. But it's an old language. It's a very old language, and I haven't really played around with the latest updates to it, but you're probably not going to get the same features you'd get using a modern programming language like Kotlin, or certainly Python is very different from C++. As far as C# is concerned, you want to think of this as a pretty different animal. I've only written a little bit of C#. I have friends who use it, who really like it for server-side development. And if I recall correctly, it's used quite a lot for programming server-side stuff, like I said, and then I think also quite a lot for Windows development, if I'm not mistaken, and also I think Unity game development. I've written a little bit of C#. I like it. It's a really nice language. It's actually pretty similar. If I had to, for the rest of my life, pick Java or C#, that would be a tough call. I'd probably go with Java for the JVM, but C# for just the language itself. So anyways, so Nabir, I'm gonna just leave your questions off for a little while and get to some other ones. Feel free to ask the other questions later on, but yeah, we're gonna get to some other stuff here because I've been rambling for quite a bit. All right, so question from Harish. Learning from Android docs, would you recommend learning topic by topic according to the docs, or do projects and learn topics? You don't know. Okay, 100%, 100% follow what I call a project-based learning approach. I hope I'm not still in, I might still be in full screen, am I? Nope. Okay, so you need to follow what I recommend is a project-based learning approach. So to give you a direct example, this year I wanted to learn compiler development. So the very first thing I did is I asked myself, how can I start building a simple compiler? That turned out to be a really tough thing to answer because there isn't really such a thing as a simple compiler unless you're building a language which does like almost nothing. And even then it's fairly complicated. But the key point is you want to follow a project-based learning approach. I do not recommend topic by topic. If you have a really good memory and you can just read something and it's in your brain and then you can apply that in a project later on, do topic by topic. I can't learn that way. I don't learn that way. I pick a project that I want to build and I'll try and pick something which maybe includes some features that I want to learn. So for example, if I wanted to learn REST development, R-E-S-T, in Android, I would probably build a GitHub REST parser. But other than that, pick something that you want to build and use that to guide the topics that you learn. And then a second point, the Android docs are really good, but you've got to understand that, sorry, I meant to highlight here. The Android docs are really good, but the thing you have to understand is that they're showing you the way they want you to build applications, and I really appreciate the work they do, but some of the libraries in Jetpack, for example, which they're going to force down your throat, I don't really like so much. So the trade-off of learning strictly from the Android docs is that you're going to do it the way they want you to do it, and that's generally speaking going to work well in most situations, and then you're going to run into edge cases where it works very poorly or not at all, which is that's not specific to just Jetpack libraries. That is the cost of using libraries in general. I think it's safe though. Oops, that's not what I wanted to show. There's my green screen. Now I'm all mixed up here. Let's get the chat on top. So I think overall it's a good way to learn Android, but just understand there's going to be a lot of stuff that they're not going to tell you that's going to be basically managed by the libraries. So hopefully that's useful. I'll spend a bit of time here. Let's see, am I in? Oh, I'm in full screen. Okay. I really need to go and buy a second monitor because it's hard for me to remember if I'm in full screen mode or not. Okay, does Mbvm always tied to live data? So the answer is certainly not. So let me give you a code example. This is Samsara KMM. It's an Android multi-platform project that I'm working on, which uses Jetpack Compose. I'm going to take you into the Android module here, and let's just hop into DayView. Oh, that's not what I wanted. DayView model. And where is the screen? So this application uses part of the Mvvm pattern. This part you'll recognize anyways. So the important thing is we have our viewModel object here, and we're passing that into our composables. If this was like if you're not familiar with Compose, just imagine we're giving this to a fragment, same idea, and then the fragment would be listening for changes. And you'll notice here in this viewModel, I neither extend Jetpack viewModel, nor do I use live data. In this case, all I have are Kotlin's function types. So basically think of it as like a variable which points to a function. In this case, it actually points to lambda expressions. If that's going over your head, don't worry about it. To answer your question, you really don't need to use live data. Basically, live data is the observer pattern, also known as the publisher subscriber pattern, plus two things. One of the things you get with live data is tight coupling to the platform, which has costs. And then the other thing you get is lifecycle awareness, which is this is why it's tightly coupled to the platform, is the lifecycle awareness. Okay, if you're going to be doing Compose, I would pretty strongly recommend against live data. I think live data is fine in the front end of an Android application. If you're a big believer in Jetpack, building your app using all the latest Jetpack libraries, probably you'll still want to use live data. I don't think this library is going to live very long. Because there's just, the thing about the observer pattern is it's very easy to implement yourself. Like this isn't the full observer pattern because I can't have a list of observables, but this thing here is basically like pretty much the observer pattern. So anyways, a small version of it. In the observer pattern, you can have like a list of things listening, and I could code that up if I wanted to. I just only need one observer here. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Mbvm is an architectural pattern, and if you like, I think I have some links in the description box below where I talk about common software architecture things. All right. Holy crap, we are getting so many questions. I'm going to have to try and go through these pretty quickly. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Atri asks, when can we expect another Jetpack Compose-based Android app build along like you did with that Sudoku project? That was really good, Ryan. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed that. It could be a while. Those things take like 2 months to make. I know that might sound crazy to you, but like a 4-hour tutorial, I think that one was 3 or 4 hours. Those take like 2 months of 8 hours a day to make. And at the moment, I don't plan to do another full course like that. But with that being said, I will be doing a lot of live streaming. I will be doing some work with Kotlin multi-platform mobile. And in my Kotlin multi-platform mobile projects, I will be using Compose in, for example, the desktop client. I don't recall if there's a functioning Compose.js library out there, but I want to use Compose as much as possible. I might do another like live app rebuild. Maybe I'll do that next Halloween. Someone brought that up. Okay. What's up, BitGun? That's an interesting question. Gen2 asks, how do you decide whether a method should interface method or not? If I understand this question, is abstraction / polymorphism required? So in other words, do you anticipate, sorry, there's screaming kids outside. I apologize about that. I'm not sure if you can hear it. Do you anticipate the implementation to change over time? If yes, probably make it an interface method. I'm assuming you're not talking about default methods, but this is really in a nutshell. Do you expect it to change, or do you need it to behave differently in different situations? And even there, you can use other patterns. Like you could use the, I always mix up. It's either the strategy pattern or the command pattern or both. So Gen2, if you have like a specific example in mind, I might be able to give you a more specific answer there. Okay. So Patrick asked follow-up question, can I implement Viewmodel without observer? No. That's a good question. Let me ramble about this for a second. So Patrick asked, can I implement Viewmodel without an observer? So the answer is no, it would not be Mbvm at that point. So the here's a funny thing. I get asked like 500 times a day, not really, but I get asked almost every live stream about Mbvm, and people ask me, is it the best architecture, blah, blah, blah. So here's the funny thing about it. There's different ways to do Mbvm. So to give you an example, hopefully I'm not in full screen. To give you an example, you can have a view model which just exposes like plain old Java objects or plain old Kotlin objects. You can have a view model which, I think I have a different kind of view model in here somewhere. Let me just have a look. Manage task list. No. I wonder if this is like an old version of this code. Here we go. So you can either have a view model which simply exposes some data and the fragment listens to it, or the view listens to it, or whatever. Or you can have a view model which contains an observable field, an observable thing, for every element in the particular view. These are two main different ways. One approach prioritizes reducing the presentation logic in the view, which would be this approach. The other approach promotes reusability of view models. So they're orthogonal is the fancy word people like to use. There's different ways to do Mbvm. However, the one common thing in all Mbvm implementations is that the view may, the view model may not hold a reference to the view. It's not allowed. So you can't, in your view model, say, for example, val view I tasklist.view or whatever. You can't do this. You can expose something that the view can either grab or observe, but you can't reference the view from the view model. So it basically needs to be an observer. I think this is, oh, I just opened up Linux, my bad. Don't ignore that code there. This would be like the observers here. Okay. Too Fast asks, what is the uses of object-oriented programming in Pointer? I mean, I didn't go to school for this stuff, so I'm really not an expert in these sorts of specifics. If I recall correctly, what gave rise to object-oriented programming was allowing, I think it was stack variables, allowing to put a pointer variable in the stack which referenced something in heap memory, if I recall correctly, but I might be wrong on that. But try Googling that one. I can't give you a simple answer there. Mój drog Stanislav says, greetings. My question will be, how are you doing, my friend? Все нормально. Things are going good. Very good. Super busy though. So Too Fast then goes on to ask, is C++ a cross-platform language? C++ can be run on any platform that has a compiler for C++. So you could probably, I would say it's very cross-platform for Linux development. So I'll just rate this, is C++ cross-platform? Probably not in the sense that you're thinking it is, but any platform which has a C++ compiler, like for example, I think Clang, is it 2 L's in Clang or is it just 1 L? Maybe it's Clang, GNC or whatever. I think they do C++, but I know they're C compilers. So yeah, any platform which has a C++ compiler, and a C++ compiler is a program which takes in C++ and spits out whatever language needs to be run. So yeah, Linux, it's very cross-platform for like Linux distributions. Android has a Linux kernel, so it would be, usable through the NDK. For Android, you could use the NDK. As far as like doing web stuff, not really, no. You would have to probably interpret it into JavaScript or WebAssembly or something like that, and then you have to start asking yourself why you're doing that. Noobmaster asks, do I have a tutorial of Android development? I have so many tutorials on Android development. I've been doing this since 2016, and most of what I do has been Android development, so please go check my channel. I also have a new Android tutorial on Free Code Camp, their channel, teaching Jetpack Compose and my own personal architectural approach to Jetpack Compose. Someone whose name I unfortunately cannot read. I think that's Japanese if I had to guess, but our friend asks, how do you study TDD? Do you have any recommendations? Uncle Bob, so Robert Martin, who apparently has some political views which are very upsetting to a lot of people, but I'm not going to comment on that either way. Robert Martin does very good introductions to test-driven development with a big asterisk here. There's two kinds of TDD people. 100% code coverage. Do not write any code unless you have a failing test. And then there are people who are like, test anything which is important to test. So anything full of logic is an easy way. And generally write the test before the code. I am more of one of these people, and so is Don Felker for that matter. I think it's good to learn TDD using the code coverage really hardcore way that Uncle Bob teaches it, but I also don't think you necessarily need to do that in production code. It depends on the production code you're writing. So the compiler I'm writing, for example, I am trying to do 100% code coverage, and most of the time I'm writing a test before the implementation. If you're writing a Android project and you're really experimenting with things, a bunch of new libraries and stuff like that, I don't think you need to follow that hardcore of an approach. I think you should pull the logic out into logic classes, presenters, things like that, and you should definitely test those. But should you try and test your everything with espresso and roboelectric and things that are tightly coupled to the platform? I don't. So, yeah. I'm not really trying to force my opinions on you, though. If you really like doing 100% code coverage and not writing a single line of code unless there's a test failing which covers that line of code, if you really like doing that, do it. And if it works for you, do it. Don't necessarily just believe what I say. Don't necessarily just believe what Uncle Bob says. Find your own approach. I also have been building a compiler using TDD live. So if you check my live videos over the past little while, I've been building a compiler. So if you want to literally see someone using test-driven development to build something real time, go and check those live streams out. I think they're called like building a programming language live, Kotlin, TDD, something like that. Oh, we got the special question, which is the best architecture. All right, well, we'll get to that eventually. What's up, Pemba? Pemba asks, do you use any product on your beard? I do have a beard balm that I use, which I really like. It's very natural. I don't think I have any on right now, but if I'm going outside or something, I do put on beard balm. What else? Jay asks, is Java useful for quantitative trading? Sorry. I'm not familiar with if Java has libraries which are useful for that. I would imagine probably, but I would also doubt that it's the best language to do that. But it's not something I have my own expertise or implementations in, so I can't help you there. Bikyan asks, how to make a UI that fits all screen sizes? Oh, that's a tricky one. I can really only give you two general approaches. So one is to provide alternate views, we'll call them, and assets based on screen size. So in Android, this would mean using, what do they call those? Different resource, I can't remember, are they called resource configurations? So for example, I don't actually use layouts here, but you would go to like, new, I don't know, new Android resource directory, and you can do them for like different screen sizes. So you could do like screen small, or you could do specific dimensions. So that's one general approach. I think I'm not great at web development, but I think in HTML or something, you can specify like if the screen is a certain width or height, use this configuration or CSS file or whatever. If the screen's a different height, use this. So basically using different resource configurations based on screen size. I already wrote that there. And then the other approach is to use UI, what I'll call flexible UI tools / libraries. So again, on Android, that could be using constraint layout, layout weight, those sorts of things. So constraint layout is a great example. And there is actually a constraint layout implementation in Jetpack Compose. So you can use that. Those are really the two things I can offer you. Also, one important, this is just a little tip here, use SVG images for any image which isn't highly detailed. So for example, logos, simple graphics, icons, use SVGs. It's one file which adjusts to basically any size of screen. This is a really important tip here, just for your awareness. If you have a highly detailed image though, a high resolution image, don't use SVG because then the file size can be like 50 megabytes. Yeah, basically what Track said, like use different buckets for different screen sizes. Oh, cool. I'll throw this in here from Tracks. There's also a library from Intuit called SDP that will scale the UI elements for multiple screens. So that's another very valid thing. Use a library. I'll just paste this in while we're here. Thank you, Trax. I appreciate that. This is one of the great things about doing this live stream is that it's not just me answering questions, because I don't have all the answers. And there are some people who are more specialized or just generally more intelligent than I am. So, all right. There's different ways to do this. So Ibrahim says, how to send data to another fragment. I use bundle, but it gets null error when I use navigation back to home fragment. What is the problem, please? As far as your specific problem, since I don't have the code in front of me, I can't really help you. So, and I don't know, are you doing single activity? Are you doing one activity per fragment? It's kind of hard to answer this question without implementation. So one way to do it is to use a shared view model plus navigation. I've never done this, and I wouldn't do it. Well, never say never, but I don't think I would ever do that because I don't really like the navigation library, and I don't like sharing view models across multiple different views, but there might be use cases for that. You might try, so maybe a quick fix would be to override on back pressed, and so maybe I should show you some. I don't actually have any fragments in this project, so I can't really show you how you would do this, but let's see. This might be an easy way to fix it. So within your fragment, pretend this is a fragment, you would go you would override on back pressed, and then you would do like your start activity intent, and you would do you would set your bundle thing, add your bundle.extras, whatever. Hopefully you understand what I mean. So basically you're handling the on back pressed yourself in the fragment. That might be an easy way to handle it. I think you would also remove the super call if you do that. But understand that could screw up your back stack, but that might be an easy way to fix it. I can't really help you too much other than that. Maybe someone else who's better with that kind of thing in the chat could help you though. Akshay says, I have not used Compose for the last 2 to 3 months. Did it fix its performance issues like slow app startup? I don't know. I didn't personally experience slow app startup using my Compose in my applications, but I didn't really build anything. I had some stuff which was like UI-wise pretty complicated, but I have no idea how bad it was, if they've improved it, so I can't really help you there, man. Ibrahim says, in Mbvm, I can't know what element should be in the view model and the UI controller. I'm not really sure what you mean specifically. What element should be in the view model and the UI controller? Yeah, I don't really understand what you mean. All right, Hardik asks, what are the pros and cons of inheriting my view model from Android Lifecycle view model? I've seen in your videos which you don't inherit from view model. Yeah. So the general answer here, let me make sure I'm not in full screen mode. No. The general answer here is that I avoid any tight coupling to the platform / third-party libraries. So that would be something like inheriting from Lifecycle view model, unless it solves more problems for me than it creates. Now it's worth rambling for a second. Why is tight coupling an issue? It has a number of side effects. It makes your code more difficult to test. I know there's some libraries which can allow you to write unit tests for your view models, but you have to use libraries. It makes your code more difficult to test. It makes your code more likely to break in the future. The reason for this is that standard library code tends to change less frequently than libraries / platform code. But with that being said, you know, is it going to break in the next year or two? Probably not. Maybe with live data, we'll see. Those are the main issues. A good general thing which Uncle Bob likes to say is keep frameworks at arm's length. I think that's a very good approach in general. So those are the main cons. It's difficult to test. It doesn't solve more problems for me than it creates, is basically the answer of why I personally avoid it. It also makes my code more resistant to change. Now, what would the pros be? Let's see. Lifecycle awareness, if that's useful for you. So it might be useful. You have to, it's less configuration you have to do. In a nutshell, this is my answer for almost every kind of library. The benefit is that it's generally a little bit quicker to implement. Not always, not in this particular case, but generally libraries, they're a little quicker to implement. They will hide some of the details from you, which means you don't have to worry about those details, so less configuration. The cost can be that sometimes hiding those details is a problem itself. And then if you want to learn to build Android apps, Google, I should say the Android team. The Android team has lots of code labs and samples which will show you how to build things that way. So maybe a benefit would just be that there's lots of learning examples. There's not as many people that have become disillusioned with libraries like I have. I never used to be this way. All right. Trax asks, by the way, Ryan, did you get the new job that you were preparing for? Or did I get that wrong when you were moving? So I was preparing for a job. I did do the interview. I think I did pretty well in the interview. There was only one technical question which I didn't do well on, which had to do with Kotlin's series API. So there's like collections and then there's series, and there's a technical reason why sometimes you want to use series. They gave me a response which was basically keep in touch, but you need more experience. So fair enough. I think ironically I wasn't actually applying. They told me to apply for a different role than I originally applied for. And I think the role that I ended up applying for, I do think I'm qualified for that role. It was for developer relations, and I think that's actually most of what I've been doing on my own. But I didn't end up getting the job. They did encourage me to keep in touch, though, and I might keep in touch. So, you know, you win some, you lose some. Rocky, if you're still here. Oh, good, you asked the question. Rocky asks, the doubt I have is I don't know which course I should learn in order to create cracked version. Can you say me which course I should know? You know, Rocky, if I understand what you're asking here, I don't really recommend doing that kind of thing. I'm not judging you if you do, but I'm a pretty honest human being. I don't like stealing other people's intellectual property. I don't like stealing other people's code and then remaking it and then publishing it myself. I've had people do that to me, and it's pretty irritating, so I can't help you there. Let's see. Noobmaster, I'm not sure. I'm assuming you were talking about my compiler development, but I don't remember what that comment is to do with. Fortune asks, how long should one realistically prepare for the Associate Android Developer Certificate if starting from 0 XP? It's hard to say, bro. So I don't have Android Associate Developer. Here's what I would suggest for you. I can suggest like a learning path. Build a GUI calculator and try to follow Mbvm or MVP or MVC. It really doesn't matter that much. Probably Mbvm, but MVP is fine too. Build a graphical calculator. And I think if you can build that, you'll probably have the basic skills for, you know, I don't remember, is Associate Android Developer, is that a course you take? Or do you just do a test, and then if you pass the test, you get a certificate? If it's something you need to pass and then you get a certificate, you're going to want to do the next thing, which would be make a note-taking application or something similar. You want to do something which, in other words, do something which requires persistence. So that is like storing data in a database or the cloud. Random digression for my more advanced Android developers. Has anyone played around with where is it? Is it in my common module? Yeah, has anyone played around with SQL Delight? I'm just curious to hear. Anyone tried SQL Delight? I used it in my most recent project, and I'm gonna get rid of Room. I'm not gonna use Room anymore. I like this quite a lot. Now, I'm a noob when it comes to SQL, but basically the gist of SQL Delight is you need to have a basic understanding of SQL, which SQLite, I guess I should say. But you basically write this crap, and then it generates the API for you, a type-safe API if you do it properly. And I found this quite a bit. It's not as easy as Room, but I like that you can use this thing basically cross-platform, which is why I initially tested it out. Anyways, let me just have a quick sip of coffee here. And if you've enjoyed the show so far, please do me a favor. Consider hitting the like button. Also consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon so that you can know when I am live in the future. Okay. So, next question. From Zona. All right. Zona asks, I'm really confused how to design class to implement code in Android. Zona, can you just confirm that you're talking about like a Java or Kotlin class? Like when you say class, you mean a programming construct? I'm going to assume by class you mean like a Kotlin class, like not teaching a class. Just wait a moment to hear the question. I'm going to assume that's the question. So here's basically what I would say. So I have a lecture called, let me just think if I can remember it off the top of my head. Let me just pull it up really quickly. Give me 1 second here, folks. Okay, I'm going to paste a link in the description box, how to design information systems. So the link I pasted in the comments, the link I pasted there, so I gave a lesson to a group of software engineers in Egypt, and basically it explains to you exactly a systematic process to go from written statements to so you go from basically like problem stories and user statements. I explain what those are in the thing, to designing classes in your and objects in your code. So this should give you the exact process. And then as far as how to build on top of there, just worry about getting your basic classes created and structured properly, and then you're going to build on top of that foundation from there. I can't really give you a brief explanation of how to do the next stage, so maybe come back in a week or two after you watch that video. All right. What else do we have here? All right, our friend with what is presumably an Arabic name. I'm not even, probably my computer messed up the formatting on that. Our friend asks, oh, sorry, wrong one. Our friend asks, what is the best architecture, Mbvm or MVI, I think was what it was. So I answer that question also in a video. I think I have that video in the description box. Do I have it there? Yes. So my friend, look in the description box. You're going to see a link to a video called literally What is the Best Architecture? Click on that video and watch that, and I will explain to you exactly why there is not a single architecture out there which is the best architecture, but I will teach you some things about figuring out what is the best architecture for a specific project. But the really brief answer is that there's no such thing as the best software architecture. It doesn't exist. And the reason why is that much like a building's architecture, it depends on the surroundings and the environment and where it's being built and what it's being built for. So I could argue that the architecture of my apartment here is the best architecture for an apartment. Would I use that same architecture if I was building an industrial car factory? No, I would use a totally different architecture. So it's actually exactly the same thing. The best architecture will depend on the project you're building. No argument. There is anyone who says MVI, MVVM, MVP, any of these things is the best architecture, they don't understand what they're saying. That is a wrong general statement. So important for people to be aware of that. Nikhil asks, is there any option to show a specific button in sum of screen for an app? Hopefully I spelled your name right, Nikhil. Is there any option to show a specific button? Maybe you could, definitely, assuming Android, you could maybe have an observable field to show or hide the button depending on something. You could maybe show or hide the button. There's definitely an option out there, but I'm not sure I can help you much beyond that. Question from John. Beginner self-taught dev here. Hey, I'm a self-taught dev as well. Is there a chance for non-US people to work in big tech names? I don't actually know what WHF or WFH means. I feel like an old person now. Let me look that up. Find out what the kids are saying these days. WFH. Work from home. Okay, that's what that means. What does it take to work with big names like Facebook, Google, Netflix? So to answer the first part of your question, non-US people to work in big tech companies, absolutely. Absolutely. I know people, if you follow the Android community, you'll see people who are very prominent as software developers and very prominent and outspoken in the community. Like one individual, Niharika Aurora, I think is her name, the droid lady on Twitter. She just got hired by by Google. Yeah, it totally. What does it take to work with these companies? So this is a more challenging question to answer. So basically, to answer your question here, you need to be very good at what you do. It doesn't necessarily matter that you're self-taught, because the truth is that we all know at this point that there's plenty of people out there who have degrees who really suck at coding. I once worked with a guy who had his master's in computer science. It wasn't software engineering, in fairness, and he didn't know what GitHub was. So, like, he had no code posted online. So here are some things you can do. Build moderate to complex projects and share the source online. if you have a medium to large enterprise app, that will go a long way. Be active in the community. Generally, a lot of us hang out on Twitter. I would say Twitter is kind of like a real core place, but I guess there's also like Reddit. There's Reddit Android groups, but in particular, I think be active in the community, for example, on Twitter. Just be very active in the community. Make tutorials / screencasts / talk at remote conferences, like for example, a little plug for Android Worldwide. You need to do these sorts of things. Get experience in a company. So there's a lot you need to do, and then just a big heads up, be very good with fundamentals of data structures and algorithms, because those companies you mentioned, they are going to ask you all about the DS and algos. So you're going to want to know, like, I'm not going to give a big summary here, but you're going to want to have a lot of fundamentals down for that. I think I can't remember her name, but look up like Cracking the Code interview author. You don't necessarily have to buy her book. Maybe it's a good idea to buy her book. But there's a lot of, I can't remember her name, unfortunately, but she used to be a software engineer at, I think, Facebook and Google, who did a lot of interviewing, and she gives a lot of overviews of like what kind of DS and algos you should want to know for those sorts of things. So those are all the things you need to do. It's a lot. It's totally possible, but you need to be a very exceptional person. Hardik asks, so how to manage canceling coroutines when using my own implementation of Viewmodel. So what you would want to do in the app I have here, sorry, just let me clean this up a little bit. Let's do our view logic. So in the app I have here, I have both what is essentially a presenter and a view model, because I don't like view models being full of logic. I think that's just bad design. So what I want you to basically pretend I don't have this presenter here, this logic class, and pretend that what I'm about to show you is applied to the view model. So the way I handle it is I have this base view logic class here, which is an abstract class, and it holds on to a job object. And this job object is going to be essentially how you implement cancellation, or some part of it. So that's, and you don't have to throw it in an abstract class. I just do because this code is common amongst all of my presentation logic classes. Let me make sure I'm not in full screen. Yes. So you're going to make something have a job object, and then within that object, what you really need to do here to implement cancellation is you need to make the view model, in your example, a coroutine scope. So you're going to make it extend coroutine scope. The next thing you'll do is you're going to need to override this coroutine context, which will require giving it a dispatcher. So in a view model, you want to give it the UI context, which means it's going to be working on the main looper. And then you also say plus job tracker, and you have to initialize this thing. The effect of this is that when you want to cancel things, you basically just say, I think I have a function here, cancel stuff. Or I might not actually have cancellation here because I might not need it. Yeah, I don't actually need cancellation here. but it's effectively what you would do is you'd say like private fun cancel, and then you would just say job tracker dot I think it's cancel, something like that, and then that would tear down the coroutine, all the coroutines which are within this scope. You want to think of a coroutine scope as basically like one way to think of it is a life cycle. So you're like deploying, you've got your root coroutine scope, which will be your view model. And then any coroutines that you launch from within there, which are like nested, all of these, if you cancel the job object, that'll cancel everything which is like a child of is nested within that coroutine scope. Hopefully you're an intermediate developer. I realize the answer I just gave you is probably a little bit technical, but that is how you would do it. If you want to see that source code, my GitHub is /cove, and I think Samsara KMM, which is this project, is on there. But you could look at my graph Sudoku, for example. I think that one has cancellation in a simpler example. All right, Zona asks, how to read Android documentation API effectively. So for the API reference, I guess my answer would probably don't unless you need to. When would I look at the API documentation? I would read it only if I'm confused about what a parameter does, what the return type is, or if a given class has might have a function that I don't need to write. Those are like the specific cases that jump out at me for when I would dive into the documentation. It's definitely something I do, but I only do it when I have a specific reason to. So a great example would be like if you're learning the Compose API and you have a specific question like what is the difference between height and preferred height, for example. I hope they still call it that. I remember they changed the names of these things, and I might be using the old names, but that would be an example. Apart from that, I don't really pour through documentation, like Android documentation specifically. So hopefully that kind of helps you. I'm not sure if it does. Swamanath asks, hey, I have a parent fragment that is hosting ViewPager in one of the nested fragments. I'm recording audio, and if recording is going on, and I switch tab, recording still continues because OnDestroy is not called inside the ViewPager. You know, Swamanath, I know that that's been an issue for a long time, having ViewPagers within nested fragments. I don't remember off the top of my head how to deal with that situation because it's kind of a nightmare. Honestly, here's what I would do in a non-technical way. I would probably, I would make fake tabs. So effectively what that means is instead of using a view pager for the tabs. Oh, my cat is calling me. Instead of using a view pager for the tabs, I would make a fake tab set up, which just animates in and out the views. So for example, like the audio recording thing and the other one, basically I would fake it and then avoid using the nested fragments altogether. Is that an easy thing to do? Not necessarily. Really, the limitation here is being tightly coupled to fragments and view pager. And this is one of those specific situations where, I mean, seriously, since like 2016, I've been hearing the same problem coming up. So yeah. Okay. So Mina asks, can you briefly mention OOP pillars? So I will answer your question. I wrote an article for Smashing Magazine, which honestly to me kind of sounds like the name of a porn magazine, but it's not. So Smashing Magazine, what did I call it? Mastering, let me just look it up now, I can't remember. I have a very poor memory for certain things like that. Okay. So the article is called Mastering OOP, a Practical Guide to Inheritance, Interfaces, and Abstract Classes. And this will give you a long, detailed explanation of probably everything you want to know. Geez, I look so young in that photo. I look like I'm 17 or something. It's amazing what a beard can do, and also putting on some weight. So yeah, definitely check that article out. So to answer your question, pillars of OOP. So yes, I would say abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance. And then those are the main things. And then classes, of course, so classes and types. So I guess I'll try and cover them briefly. So abstraction, this is probably, so I hope I'm going to blow a few people's minds here. If you do not understand how abstraction is one of the most important concepts in reality, not just computing, you really should think about what abstractions are, because they exist everywhere. I am an abstraction talking to you. So if we just take a break from talking about computers, but we keep talking about information processing systems, which is like a human brain, and a computer is an information processing system. Abstractions are the way in which IPS, information processing systems, function. So for example, an abstraction could be a series of binary digits which represent a number. It could represent the location of a pixel on a screen. So an abstraction is, here's my definition. This is probably the one thing that I really think I should write a thesis on. So an abstraction, to give you a quick definition of it, I don't like verbal definitions, verbal abstractions, that's what definitions are, but it's a less detailed representation of a thing. And by thing, I mean a real world object, although you technically can imagine something that doesn't exist in the real world, and that's an abstraction. It's a less detailed representation of a thing. That's what it is. So we're choosing to associate something with these random binary digits. You're not actually looking at a screen with me on it. What's happening is the light particles are hitting your eyeball, and that's triggering some nerves, and then your brain is generating an image, an abstraction, an image out of those light particles, and it's generating an abstraction out of the sounds of my voice in your headphones or speakers vibrating against little hairs in your ear. So why? Why are abstractions, and then we'll go back into coding, but I just wanted to give some people some philosophy. You should, if you haven't thought very deeply about abstractions, you are missing how reality functions, half of how reality functions. Why are abstractions important? Important. Bandwidth. Why? The way that we were able to get computers to work and do all the insane things they can do is because they're capable of thinking or processing using these small abstractions. A computer, the reason why, for example, a computer is terrible at like walking, for example, it's really, really difficult, is because there's so much information to process. Let me give you a more practical example. What is an example of an abstraction in reality? Or in this case, an interface as well, because interfaces are abstractions. Okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was in full screen while I was typing. My bad. Okay, imagine I am a UPS delivery person. Funny story, I actually worked for UPS for one winter. Anyways, I'm a UPS delivery person. I walk up to you, I'm wearing the uniform, I have a package, and I say, hi, are you Swamanath or Zona or whatever your name was? And you say, yes, here is your package. You take the package. The UPS uniform was an abstraction. It allowed me to behave under the interface or the abstraction of a UPS delivery person. The effect of that is you knew I had a package for you. You didn't need to know my name. You didn't need to know my birth date. You didn't need to know anything about me except the important thing that I was wearing the UPS driver's outfit. So the point of explaining this is that the reason why abstractions are so important in reality and computing is that you want to only give as much detail or information which is necessary to solve the problem. If you give all the information, there's just too much information in reality for example, a modern computer to represent. There's too much information. So abstractions are really important and they're very dear to my heart. But yeah, that's kind of abstraction in a nutshell. And then for abstraction in the context of computing, abstractions, so this could be abstract classes, abstract classes, inheritance can be actually used as a weak mechanism for abstraction. Abstract classes, inheritance, and interfaces. In the context of computing, abstractions are key to mastering object-oriented programming for many, many reasons. And if you want to know those reasons, please read that article I wrote there. Next one, encapsulation. People like to call it data hiding. I don't want to talk too much about it because basically functions, classes, and fields should only ever be as visible as they need to be in order for the program to compile/run. In a nutshell, that's really all you need to know. We're talking about access modifiers, generally speaking. We could go into deeper water, but I think I've probably rambled quite a bit already. Inheritance. So inheritance is two things. It's a strong mechanism for code sharing, and it's a weak mechanism for abstraction. And if you're wondering why it's a weak mechanism for abstraction, I can fill, let's say we have like, I'll write a little bit of code. We'll just write pseudocode. How is inheritance a weak mechanism for abstraction? Let's say I have class exercise. This is just pseudocode, so whatever. Class exercise, and then we have sorry, I'm being a little bit OCD about my pseudocode, which is kind of pointless, but class barbell exercise, which extends exercise. And then we have class dumbbell exercise, which extends exercise. So basically, by making these things inherit from exercise, I can have, for example, a collection of exercise, like a list. And I can fill it with both barbell exercises and dumbbell exercises. So basically, both of these things are being treated abstractly as an exercise. So that's why inheritance is a weak mechanism for abstraction, whereas abstract classes and interfaces are a strong mechanism for abstraction. So yeah. And then what else? Classes and types. There's not a, I think probably it's not useful for me to talk too much about that. I think most of you can gather what I mean simply by showing you this here. I hope I wasn't in full screen for that. Good. Okay. Where am I? OOP pillars. Danish. I'll see if I can answer your question, Danish. I might not be able to. Because the truth is that the more I learn about clean architecture, the more I feel like people kind of do it differently. In a clean architecture pattern application, let's say I am caching data in a local database. So is this one kind of my use cases or not? Because I believe that the action that user performs is called use case, and in this scenario, caching data is not something that the user is doing, but the system. What are your thoughts on this? So really, so in principle, I agree, but in practice, if it makes sense, just write to a local database slash cache. The thing about clean architecture is that you have to balance the theory of it, and I think your theory is pretty much correct here. The user, in the context of a use case, it doesn't really care whether the data is stored on Mars or on a local database. But the thing about it is that, let's say, for example, you're tightly coupled to Android. Let me make sure I'm not in full screen. Yep. You're tightly coupled to Android. It's easy to just store it locally without having to send off a use case and then do all this stuff. Be pragmatic is basically what I'm saying. Be pragmatic. So in other words, follow clean architecture only to the extent that it solves more problems than it creates. And there's definitely situations where it can get into what's called over-engineering. But then at the same time, I don't think it's worth throwing out clean architecture entirely, because the general principles, which I try to teach in clean architecture now these days, I think the general principles are very valid. Some parts of the application really shouldn't care where the data is getting stored, but also be pragmatic with the implementation. Cyberpunk asks, how is the job market for Android in Canada? Is it oversaturated? I wouldn't say it's oversaturated. It's pretty competitive because there's a lot of people, but I certainly wouldn't say it's oversaturated, and I think it's a good time to look for remote roles if that's your thing. Grigory Shimichev says, nice to see you. Nice to see you as well, my friend. Unfortunately, my Russian is a little bit rusty. Alex asks, what are my income streams? So basically, at the moment, YouTube, I was selling my courses on Skillshare, but Skillshare can go F themselves because they abruptly closed my account and accused me of a whole bunch of violations which were completely made up. And then I go on to find out that this is a thing that Skillshare does pretty regularly. So at the moment, basically just doing random contracting stuff and my YouTube stuff. You're welcome, my friend. Okay. So Gianna says, what are the best books on writing clean and efficient code? Top on my list, Martin Fowler. So pretty much like any of his books, but like patterns of enterprise architecture, but really like anything by Martin Fowler. I personally think he's just the best programming, architecture, and design teacher out there. You could also look at Uncle Bob, so Robert Martin, Clean Code. Now, the thing, I always have to say this with Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob is a very talented teacher and a much better architect than I am, but just be aware that some of his explanations are confusing. And if you want to know like a great example of a confusing one, look up the single responsibility principle from Solid Principles. And chances are, even if you think you understand what he was talking about there, it's not what he was talking about. If you think the SRP, so if you think the SRP states a module, as he calls it, which is basically a source file, let's say class. If you think the SRP states a class should only have one primary job / concern, that's not what the single responsibility. Let's actually one primary responsibility. If you think that's what the SRP means, you're wrong about it, as I was. And I'm not going to explain what he defines it as, because it doesn't make sense outside of stakeholders. So yeah, those would be my main suggestions. I also really liked Design Patterns Explained by Alan Shalloway and James Trott. And then if you're working in Java, you should definitely read, what's it called, Effective Java by Joshua Block. I haven't actually read this myself. I've read summaries of a lot of Effective Java. So those would be my personal recommendations. So I'm going to ask, and there is still a delay on 10 seconds in the chat. Well, so I'm on ultra low latency, so there's nothing I can do about that. Thank you. Trax mentions the book I couldn't read, I couldn't remember, Cracking the Coding Interview by Gail Lockman McDowell. So if you're trying to get hired by one of the big companies, probably look up stuff by Gail Lockman McDowell. You're welcome, John. John says, thank you so much for answering my question. Keep up the good work. Thanks for helping the community. You're very welcome. Sukrab, apologies if I mispronounce your name, says, it If I learn a new technology, then I can't rewrite that technology without any sample. For example, if I want to use recycler view in an app I want to create, I will definitely look at the sample and then write the code. I can't remember the code. Is this a normal case for new programmers? I'm not sure if you guys can hear it, but there is a child screaming in the apartment next door, just like, ah! Okay. So if I understand your question, Sukrab, oh, sorry, I was in full screen mode. Sorry about that. I really need to get my second monitor set up. If I understand your question, my friend, I think what you're saying is that you're not good at remembering implementation details. So maybe you go and you build an application that uses a recycler view, and then you leave that alone for a week or two, and then you come into a new project and you want to build a new recycler view and you can't remember how to do it. I think that's what you're saying. The good news for you is that I personally am not great at remembering implementations. After almost a decade of practice as a programmer, I'm probably pretty good at it now, but it's definitely not something that I've ever been really good at. If I don't use, for example, a for loop, an enhanced for loop in Java for like 6 weeks or something, I forget how to write it and I have to look it up again. You've got to understand that what makes a good programmer is not necessarily one thing. So in my personal case, I was really bad at learning Java, and I was really bad at remembering implementation. Where I was really good at is once I started to get to the field of software architecture, all of a sudden I was able to absorb that stuff like a sponge. I'm a very big picture visual thinker. I can remember very complicated concepts if I can represent it in a big picture. So I have my own advantages as a programmer. I can literally visualize the entire architecture of an application in my head. That's how I solve architectural problems. It's how I created my own software architecture. It's really easy for me, to be honest. So I think it's not necessarily something wrong with you. You might not be good at that one particular skill, but you might have other things as a programmer that you're good at. Never assume that just because you're bad at one thing or that you have, troubles learning a language or something like that, that you won't be a good programmer, because you'd probably be pretty surprised at the people in the community, myself included, who weren't very good at programming when they started. But the difference is we kept practicing. So hopefully that helps. Trax has to go, but thank you so much for joining me, man. Take care. Vishva says, my God, your channel is a gold mine. Oh, there is a question here. Thank you for the nice statement there. What's your view on being a polymath? Because you're someone who I call a jack of all trades, dev, engineering, and architecture, and how has been the journey? What's my view on being a polymath? Well, so here, I'll just show the question really quickly. So I'll just talk about some personal stuff because it's basically what this question is about. So ever since I was a little child, I've always been asking questions constantly. Like I remember being like 7 years old and asking why water boils, asking why I can look through a window but also see my reflection in that window. I have a mind which constantly asks questions. It was actually a really big problem until I learned meditation, because my mind would not shut up ever. And then it was hard for me to interact with other people because I would be up in my head all the time. So, so part of it is that I'm naturally inquisitive. The very reason I started programming is I just wanted to know how does this... I was on computers. I would play on computers since I was very young, like 6 or 7. And I wanted to actually know, how do you make a window pop up on the screen? just simple stuff like that. So how I got into programming initially was just simply wanting to know how things worked. In terms of like software architecture, that was definitely something that I was naturally very good at. And so I pursued that because it was just interesting to me and also practically useful. And then in terms of like software engineering, that was something I had avoided for a long time, and it frustrated me. I hate not knowing things. I hated it. I hated the fact that software engineers knew the stuff I didn't, and I hated the fact that computer science students knew how computers really worked and I didn't. So, to kind of answer your question, I do have quite a broad experience and understanding in computing because I try to actively to fill holes in my knowledge gaps. And I also have I'm very stubborn. I don't accept that there is a single thing that a human being can learn that I can't learn given enough time and effort. Keyword, given enough time and effort. But I don't accept, and that's been the case so far, is there's nothing I can't learn and understand if I put enough time into it. So I would do things. I would, for example, to understand digital circuits, I built a computer in Minecraft because learning about it from an MIT course, I couldn't really understand what they were talking about. But in building a computer in Minecraft, now I know exactly how a computer works at the level of digital circuits. I literally built them. For software engineering, similar thing. I implemented a whole bunch of different algorithms. So I like being a polymath. I think it's especially important in the role I have right now, which is, teaching people. And my personal goal is to understand computers at every level. So some things that I'm missing. So I've got software architecture. I've got GUI development. I've got software engineering principles. I'm not an expert in software engineering, but I know the fundamentals. I just recently have been learning how to create languages. So language and compiler development is my latest task. I studied operating systems. I studied digital circuits. I want to study machine learning. I probably want to study cryptocurrency and probably also ethical hacking eventually. So I have these things I want to learn, and I'm, going to keep practicing. How has the journey been? Basically, learning all the things that I've learned has been the most time-consuming thing I've ever done in my life, and it hasn't always been easy because I had to figure out my own way to learn things, which is largely based on writing code. I'm not generally great at learning from other people or reading about things. So probably why I'm able to explain a lot of things in a weird way or a simpler way than other people is that I can't understand things the way a lot of other people understand things using like jargon. So it's been a tough journey, but I wouldn't change any bit of it because although I have a lot of improvement and there's so many things to learn, I like the direction I'm heading. Let's see what else here. I'm going to be a little bit picky because we're approaching 2 hours here and I still have a ton of questions. João has a question here. I'm not sure I could give much useful advice though. I see. Um, I'm not sure if I can really give you much advice or anything you probably haven't really thought of yourself. I'll just really briefly explain. So our friend here, João, hopefully I know I'm not pronouncing that perfectly, but I try. Um, so our friend says, so recently I got my first job as an Android developer in Sao Paulo, which is in Brazil. But I've been feeling really insecure because the code base is really big, messy all over the place in terms of architecture and libs. I'm the only in-office Android dev. The only other guys working remotely and can't really help me all the time. I've been feeling like I can't do anything. Do you have any advice? I've been working for 15 days and haven't really done anything useful to the company. The messed up thing is I feel like they haven't provided me with the environment I can be useful in. The other Android dev works 2 jobs and isn't available 90% of the time. Um, Man, it's a difficult situation you're in. I don't think I can really fall back on a lot of practical experience. I would say the only things I would share is do it, break this down into like just very small goals, very small changes. Don't get lost in the mass, the monolithic big ball of mud architecture, and just try and boil things down as much as you can to just very small goals. Um, it's I think it's normal, especially if this is like your first Android role in like a big company. It's pretty normal to feel pretty lost. So I wouldn't think that that's something that's you know a huge. I think that's probably pretty normal. And secondly, it doesn't really sound like there's any real leadership in the company. Like you said, it doesn't sound like they provided you with an environment to be useful. Like it doesn't sound like they're giving you much in the way of like use cases or specific things. So I can't really give you much useful advice here other than um, I think a practical thing to do is just boil things down into really small goals and small changes. It sounds like either you're going to need to step up in terms of leadership, or you're going to need to find someone who does have some kind of leadership, like your project manager, and you need to just get kind of a clear idea of what they expect out of you. And I can't really help you. Maybe our friends in the chat can give you some more advice there, some who are more used to working in big companies. But I wish you luck, man. Okay. Hey, what's up, Chayton bro? Vibav asks, or Vabav, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Please tell me how difficult it is to move from Android native to with Kotlin, Android native with Kotlin to Flutter, and is this a right career move? So let's break this up into 2 things. How difficult is it? It depends on how good of an Android native developer you are. What I would suggest to you is rebuild a small to medium sized app you wrote in Android Kotlin in Flutter. Don't build a new thing. So why you would do this is you want to learn how to map your knowledge of Android and Kotlin, Kotlin Android to Flutter Android without worrying about solving the problems of a new app domain. So that's how I learned Kotlin really quickly, coming from a Java background. Admittedly, probably, I don't know if Java is more similar to Kotlin than Kotlin is to Flutter, but this is what I suggest you do. Rebuild an app you've already written in Flutter, and I think that's a good way to fast track your knowledge. Is this a right career move? I have no idea, man. Or I'm not sure. My friend, let's say that. I have no idea. Are you going to be able to get work? Probably. I don't think this is something anyone can really answer for you. What I would say is if you are interested in Flutter, then go for it. Follow what interests you. Also, obviously, you have to pay the bills, so that's some consideration too. But in terms of learning goals, go with what interests you, because the things you're interested in, you're going to learn them faster and have a better time learning them, more enjoyable time. And there's definitely jobs out there for Flutter developers. I'm skeptical on Flutter 5 or 10 years down the road, but it might carry on. So, and I do have friends who started in Android native and then went to Flutter. And so it's definitely a path that you can take. If it'll be successful or not, I have no idea. Oh, that sucks, Swagro. It looks like it's all on your side. Hopefully you'll be able to watch the recorded version. All right, I'm going to be really picky here, or I'm just going to give really short answers for the things we got left, unless they're particularly interesting. Okay. Avadut asks, which book first, Clean Code or Clean Architecture? I haven't actually read Clean Architecture by Uncle Bob. Probably Clean Code. Oh, I forgot to share the screen when I was typing the books. I do apologize about that. Once I get my second monitor set up, then that will be less of an issue. But let me leave that. I just forgot to do it again. Let me leave that on here for a little bit. These are the books that I recommend. This is a fun question from Malarax. I'm not going to go into much detail. Just so people don't get super pissed off, let me... I'll paste the books in the comments. Okay. Where was that? I'm not going to explain the patterns. You can ask me maybe next Sunday if you want me to explain some of them, but what are some of the most important design patterns that I should know in Android? Most importantly, observer pattern is a big one, and you don't need to make it super complicated. This is also known as the publisher subscriber pattern. Because if you understand what this pattern is, you're going to understand how live data works, how RxJava works, Mbvm in general. So this would be a really key one, and hopefully you can find a simple implementation of it. I have some simple implementations on my my GitHub, bracket Cove. I think Clean, what's it called? Clean Android GUI. I have a project on there called something like that, which shows a really basic implementation of the observer pattern. The facade pattern, which you'll probably know it as the repository pattern. The repository pattern is the facade pattern. It's just with the repository, it's specifically applied to data storage and access mechanisms. Those would be really, really useful ones. There's also I always mix up whether it's the strategy or command pattern. Let me just show you the pattern in the code. I can't remember the stupid names. Okay, so here I have a logic class, and it has this one function called onViewEvent. So here we have that abstract function, onViewEvent. And this function takes in a sealed class, which represents any potential event in the user interface. And then I have this one single function, and this is called either the strategy pattern or the command pattern. I can't remember. But it's basically a way to clean up interfaces between classes. So this allows me to have a single entry point to test all of the units within my presenter. So, you know, that's a fun little one. There's certainly other ones, but I think these are probably the ones that I think are just generally pretty useful. So observer pattern, repository pattern, and one of these, whichever one I happen to show you, would be useful. Let me paste my bro Chayton. Is it Chayton 2? Is that your Twitter handle? My bro mentioned some more patterns. So adapter, factory, yep, for sure these two. Yeah, I think that's a very good summary of like the most common ones for sure. Okay, what else have we got? What's up, Jason Cruz? Jason asks, hi, hey, I'm new to this channel. Is the channel's main theme on Android mobile app development? I would say most of my videos are on Android mobile development, but the truth is that I'm very rarely just teaching you Android implementation. I'm generally teaching you stuff that applies to most programming languages. So at this point, I wouldn't, I did get it right, Chayton 2. Follow my friend Chayton 2 on Twitter. He's got lots of good stuff. And he's also, if you're interested in desktop compose, he's got some interesting live streaming stuff going on and interesting projects. Sorry, I should, I'm really bad at managing this with one screen. Chayton 2. Okay, I got sidetracked there. So yeah, I've branched out into a lot of different stuff lately, Jason. So not just Android specific development, but that's a lot of what I do. But my main topics would be software architecture and design patterns, object-oriented programming in general. I also have a pretty decent understanding of computer science core concepts and software engineering core concepts. So I'm a bit of a generalist in that regard. The reason why I do this live stream is just to try and share knowledge on things I'm actually aware of. Because when I was coming up as a beginner developer, I just wanted someone I could ask questions to and get hopefully a straightforward answer. And I didn't have that, so I try and give that service to other people. Rizwan asks, why did I pick the wise-ass name? There's a very long explanation, but I was a very angry person when I created this channel. And I had a lot of resentment towards academia. And so the wise-ass and the donkey wearing a graduation hat, which is my logo, it simultaneously represents how little respect I have for people who have degrees. I don't care if you have a piece of paper. I don't care. What I care about is what do you actually know and what are your coding skills. And secondly, it's also my way of pointing out that I am myself a donkey. I am only as good as my coding skills and my knowledge. That applies to me as well. So it's kind of a double meaning. And truth be told, it's probably wasn't the best name to pick because Wiseass for my ESL friends does not have a good connotation in English. You don't really want to talk to a Wiseass. But yeah. Muhammad asks, is Java worth learning for Android development? Chaitan says learn JVM, not Java. I think that's generally I generally agree. Here's what I would say, Muhammad. So there's only one situation where I would suggest Java over Kotlin. And that situation is, do you plan to work for a company which has, Java code bases? If the company you plan to work for has Java code, you're going to have to learn Java. Other than that, I agree with Chaitan. Generally pick Kotlin and learn how the JVM works. Darius asks, why aren't you using Linux? Well, I do actually have Windows Subsystem Linux available here if I want to use it. So I do use Linux. Why do I use Windows in particular? I think Apple makes some decent products, but I think they're just a terrible company in terms of like ethics and culture. So I just really don't like Apple. I do use Linux as well, though. I use Windows and Linux, so it just depends on what I'm doing. Darius says, as a follow-up, what about doing iOS development alongside Android? I don't. I might eventually with Kotlin multi-platform mobile, but yeah, you need to buy in, because Apple is Apple, you need to buy an Apple machine. You need to buy a Mac if you want to do iOS development, unlike every other kind of company. Rizwan asks resources for JVM. That's a tricky one. I'm similar with Chaitan. I kind of just picked it up from random things. Well said, Avadu. Okay, I'll take one more question or comment and then I'm going to call it a day. But yeah, this has been a really fun episode. Hopefully it's been relatively educational. Oh. Do we have any more questions? Havadut says, we'll start Graph Sudoku series today. There's a lot of good stuff in that tutorial. It's not just about Android specifically, so a lot of good stuff. There's even a background track. All right, well, that looks like everything for today. So I would like to thank everyone who tuned in and listened to me rambling, and everyone who contributed questions and comments. It's been really fun, and of course I will be back next Sunday for another live stream Q&A. I also plan to be doing a lot of live stream almost every day. I'll be doing mostly just live coding. The projects I'll be working on, one is my compiler. I'm building a programming language and I'm building the parser for the compiler, currently live. And then also I will be working on a Kotlin multi-platform project very soon. It's going to support pretty much everything except iOS. I might eventually support iOS, but again, I just don't really care. So we'll see. But yeah, I just want to thank everybody for watching. And don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, because that's the main place where I post updates on whether I am live or not. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. This has been Ryan. You have been you. До свидания, товарищи.